Going back to the year 2000, we're going back to Ridley Scott's historical drama epic.
Dive, dive, dive.
We're talking about Gladys. Talking about Gladys.
We're talking about Gladys. Ridley Scott's Gladys.
It starred Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nielsen, and it is the film Gladiator, in which Crowe portrays Roman general Maximus Decimus, is it? Maximus Decimus Meridius, who was betrayed when Commodus, played by Phoenix, the ambitious son of the emperor, murders his father and seizes the throne. Maximus is reduced to slavery, and Maximus becomes a gladiator and rises through the ranks of the arena to avenge the murder of his family and his emperor. I didn't know until we started researching this was actually based on a 1958 book, Those About to Die, formerly titled The Way of the Gladiator. The script, written by Dave Franzoni, was acquired by DreamWorks, and Ridley Scott signed on to direct the film. The cast also included Oliver Reed, who died of a heart attack before production was finished, and was one of the first films that oversaw a CGI effect that gave the element of creating digital body doubles for the remaining scenes involving his character Proximo. It was one of the biggest successful films of the year, behind Mission Impossible 2. Critics praised it, loved the acting, made a huge star out of Russell Crowe, and it won 5 Academy Awards. But Andy, did we like Gladiator? As simple as that.
As simple as that. Were we entertained? Well,
thumbs up or thumbs down?
It gets a thumbs up over here. I remember when it first came out, I was entertained. I enjoyed it, but I didn't buy into the hysteria around it. It wasn't the best epic film ever made that most people were saying. It was drawing, it was basically a modern day attempt to bring back that Sandals epics of like Spartacus years and Ben-Hur. And that's what Ridley Scott says his influences were when he made the film, is like Spartacus and Ben-Hur. He wanted to capture that kind of feel. But I was nonplussed at the time, enjoyed it, but didn't love it. But it was on revisits that I started to get more and more into it, and rewatching it this week, which was the first time in like 15 years that I've rewatched it. And I more or less watched it with fresh eyes, and now I can see what everyone loved so much about it at the time, because it holds up so well, and it holds up so well because of the cast more than anything else. Interesting to note that this went into production with an unfinished script that changed day by day on shooting, resulting in a lot of the production and the cast arguing and being disgruntled with the writing quality. Very troubled production was then presented with the additional problem when Oliver Reed passed away, which resulted in more rewrites and complications for production. But the result was a film that made a huge dent in the box office, $500 million taken worldwide on a $103 million budget, and has long been considered one of the best epics of our time. Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, absolutely central to the whole thing. The pair of them lend heavyweight performances, lifting the somewhat trite dialogue into something with weight, menace, and impact. Joaquin Phoenix cannot be understated in this film. He is a force. He is menacing. He is terrifying. He is absolutely perfect.
I found it hard to suddenly believe that this film was 23 years old, and it still feels very, very fresh. I was overblown. I was blown away by the epic nature, of course. CGI was still in its infancy, and the idea of CGI sets was still relatively new, and so we got that sort of very, very artificial looking Rome, but it looked fantastic. It almost looked like a painting, and a lot of the film was influenced by paintings.
I recall at the time of it coming out that there was articles about the production of it and the CGI in particular, because there was a huge focus on it. The gladiatorial arena, the Colosseum, it was a full CGI creation with 32,000 rendered people. And I remember reading somewhere that they worked out that to develop the technology to give Rome that CGI look and the Colosseum that CGI look, it cost them more than it would have actually cost them to build the Colosseum itself and have a physical set. But that's to ignore the fact that the technology that was developed in order to make this look so spectacular was then used for other films, and so that writes off some of the cost. It's they don't just like remake this technology for every film. Once something's been developed, it then goes on to benefit productions going forwards. But I remember when it first came out, I was being too over picky when I first watched it, because I started spotting the problematic elements within the Colosseum, the members of the Colosseum crowd that looked like they were just on a 5-second loop of putting the fists in the air, and like it was looked like a bad gif. I could spot them, but rewatching it this week, I could still see them occasionally, but I realized that I needed to focus on what was actually happening on the Colosseum floor and ignore the background detail and just let myself immerse in it. And it was easy to just go, you know what? The rest of it holds up well. I'll focus on the story. And that's how I think I connected with it better this time, because I've ignored the little minor nitpicks that I had on those early watches.
I mean, the action sequences, the set pieces are all spectacular. And that's what Ridley Scott does. He has this unique eye of focusing on the small detail in massive sets. And it feels like an epic film. As a throwback to movies like Fall of the Roman Empire and Spartacus, and I know they were influenced on the film. It's a trite story. It's a very slim story. It works because we buy into it, and we buy into it because Russell Crowe works. It was at that point, he didn't have any of the baggage that he's brought with him from anywhere else in his career and brought forward. He was a tour de force on screen. He had a physicality about him at that particular time. And if you bought into Crowe, then you bought into the film. And that's why it works, because he is at the heart of that film all the way through. The story is about him, and his presence is spectacular. And this is what made Crowe an international star. For all the knocks he's got later on in his career, you go back and watch this film and you go, look at that performance, look at that screen presence.
I know that Crowe was reported as saying that his lines were garbage, but I'm the greatest actor in the world and I can make even garbage sound good. And it's true, because everything that he gives comes across in the delivery more than what he's actually saying, and makes a lot of his lines iconic. And according to Crowe's speaking about the film in hindsight, he used to walk off set after arguments about the dialogue if he didn't get an answer for what he was doing. And this is kind of the start of him being known as a volatile actor and a troublesome person to work with. But everything that he was saying, apparently, was for the benefit of the film, because when they started shooting, they had 32 pages of script, which was cobbled together and didn't really work. And so all of his arguments and volatility was to basically say, look, we should have this more structured. This needs to be better. And it was just frustrating him. It benefited the end result, definitely. But he got the part because the studio campaigned for him when Antonio Banderas turned it down. You can tell that it was clearly initially developed for Antonio Banderas, because it's a Spaniard who's part of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And Banderas was on a high at that point in time. But after Banderas turned it down, whilst Scott was looking at people like Tom Sizemore and even Tom Cruise, it was Crowe's standout performance in LA Confidential that made the studio go, no, this guy, this is who we need. And looking back on it, I can't think of a better choice.
Jude Law auditioned for the role of Commodus, but Scott had only one actor in mind, and that was Joaquin Phoenix. Jennifer Lopez was reportedly lobbying for the role of Lucilla, but lost out to Connie Nielsen. And of course, we had some fantastic character actors: Richard Harris, and Oliver Reed, Derek Jacobi.
Jacobi's no stranger to Roman epics, given that he played Claudius in I, Claudius for 13 episodes or something.
That's always worth checking out, folks. Jimon Housan, is it Hansu? Jimon Hansu.
Hansel.
Jimon Hansu, again, lending that fantastic screen presence that he brings in everything that he's in. And sometimes gets lost in movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, for instance, but he's always at the heart of every film. Watching it again, yes, it does have problems. It slows down in some of the wrong areas when you need it to build up, but it still feels fresh and it still feels exciting. And even more so, especially with the way that special effects have grown since then, it still feels spectacular.
Yeah, it looks and holds up pretty strongly. It's interesting that it's loosely based on real events, and that Scott had historians on set and throughout the development of it to help guide him on it. But a few of the historians quit and walked off because there was some elements that Scott went, no, that sounds ridiculous, we're not including that. Including, and this was a bit of trivia that I never realised, apparently gladiators used to be sponsored. They used to carry endorsements.
Really?
Yep. And when it was suggested by one of the historians that all the gladiators, as they become more famous, get more and more sponsorships, and they should be reflecting that on their shields and armor and things. And Scott went, that sounds ridiculous, we're not using it. And that's what caused some of the historians go, well, if you're not going to listen to us, we're quitting. But I think Scott made the right decision, because whilst, I didn't know it, and the general public wouldn't know it, and they would think it'd be an anachronistic thing when it actually wasn't. So because of how Hollywood has taught us that Roman Empire looked, we won't accept how the Roman Empire looks. It's like the whole thing of like Roman statues are always white when they wouldn't have been white. They used to paint them in like garish colours. Yet in this film, all the statues are white. It's only because the paint has worn off over the centuries that we see them as white these days. They're the kind of elements that are fictional, that the historians hated the fact that Scott was going for. But at the end of the day, he just wants to make a film that was exciting, dramatic, heartfelt, drawn from history, but not beholden to it. And in Gladiator, he certainly achieved this.
It made a big star out of Crow, as we said, and it gave Scott a chance to look at other sort of historical epics after this. Scott goes through these trends. For instance, you look back at when he was doing sci-fi with Aliens and Blade Runner and Legend, and then he did sort of more down-to-earth cop movies, and then he goes through other twists and turns. And for a time, that was Scott's influence. He did... What did he do after that? He did Kingdom of Heaven. He did Exodus, Gods and Kings. And now he's back doing a sequel to Gladiator 23 years later.
Yep. Will Gladiator 2 have the same impact next year? Only time will tell. But at this point in time, when it comes to watching Gladiator, I'm certainly entertained.
This is the kind of film that they don't make anymore. Came out in 1963. This is an epic of comedies. It stars, in no particular order, Spencer Tracy, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman, Mickey Rooney, Dick Shawn, Phil Silvers, Terry Thomas, the great Jonathan Winters, and a whole slew of guest stars. Yep, can you spot Jerry Lewis? Directed by Stanley Kramer. And it's a classic. I was gifted this film after the sad passing of my friend Keith Williams, and this was his all-time favourite film. And I kind of remembered it. It was one of those films that you used to see at Christmas or any major holiday, and it's long. It's long by comparison to how you would think of a comedy now. 90 minutes and you're in. This is 202 minutes, and that's the original cut. It is incredibly over the top. It is one of those films where it gets crazier and crazier as it goes through. So the story, after witnessing a dying man's confessions, the dying man being Jimmy Durante, hinting at hidden treasure below. Is it the W's, isn't it?
Yeah.
Below the W's, watch it and you'll find out what that is. a group of motorists turn against each other as part of their greed to try and find this treasure. If you've not seen it, you're in for a jolly good time.
This is a film that I think I always forget that I've seen, because
I
every
understand that.
time that I see it pop up, I think, oh, I really need to get round to watching that film. I remember it got nominated for a few awards as well. So, I can tick off my awards list, and then I'll start watching it. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, I've seen this film. I've definitely seen this film. But I don't switch it off. I continue watching. I must have seen this about 14 times through my life as a result. Each time going in thinking, I've not seen this film. And I don't know what it is, but I just kind of forget. And even this week on the run up to it, thankfully, now that I log things on Letterboxd, at this time I went, have I seen this before? And it turns out I literally rewatched it 3 months ago. So, yes, I have seen it before very frequently, but I'd forgotten. But I still was tempted. If I had have had more time this week, because it has been a bit of a busy week for me, I would have sat and rewatched it again, because as I was reflecting on last time I watched it, I remembered just chuckling away and pretty much lasting the whole 202 minutes with a big beaming smile on my face. And that's rare for a comedy, because like you say, that comedies normally, and particularly a comedy caper like this, where it's like a chase or a race, you're looking at 90 minutes to 100 minutes maximum. And films like this, I didn't jump onto this film at an early age, because at an early age, for me, the comedy caper road movie was Cannonball Run or Smokey and the Bandit.
Which is inspired by It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
So I discovered this, I think it must have been in the early teens when I first saw this pop up. It must have been on BBC, because it does frequently pop up on BBC TV. And my mum had said, like, oh, we'll sit and watch this. And I remember as a child that I didn't realise how long it was. I just remember being swept up by it. And I didn't recognise the people in it because they didn't mean anything to me. But over the years, as I've become more and more immersed in movies, and particularly watching older films and like seeing like the stars and legends of yesteryear on screen, every revisit of this opens my eyes to, oh my God, they're in it as well. Because like you said, like there's the strong like main cast that you've already mentioned, but the supporting cast is literally everyone who is everyone. You've got Buster Keaton's in there. You've got Arnold Stang. You've got Carl Reiner. You've got
Sterling
Paul Ford.
Holloway. Norman Fell. Peter Falk. You said Carl Reiner. So many, and and they are literally, they turn up and you go, oh look, it's such and such. But what a cast, and it kind of inspired this sort of screwball comedy that came after it, where you do have these big name stars all playing basically little vignettes. I mean, the storyline is really simple. After they find that there is this money and they're told where it is, these I don't know, let me think of the word. These motorists who stop to help just fail to negotiate a way to split the money. If they'd only talked it through, each one of them could have been rich. But the four cars begin this sort of mad dash to get to the park in Santa Rosita, and they just have mishap after mishap, comedy of errors, as they become increasingly more greedy. The film becomes more silly and more enjoyable as it goes through. And as you said, you've got Spencer Tracy, who plays a cop who looks like he's going to be the good guy, and he's just as greedy as everybody else. The great Phil Silvers. I love anything with Phil Silvers in.
Yeah.
It's my favorite Carry On movie, Carry On, Follow That Camel, because it's Phil Silvers. Buddy Hackett, Sid Caesar, the bit with Sid Caesar when they're trapped in the basement and they're trying to blow their way out of the or is just ridiculous.
They used real dynamite as well, which surprised quite a few of the cast, that any explosions were done using real dynamite. And the Sid Caesar one, there's so many moments in it that there was multiple takes. One example isn't it when the dynamite is bouncing down the stairs? There was like 86 takes in order to get the whole thing right. Such was the attention to detail. Sid Caesar for me is every time that he's popped up in a film, as I've got like immersed, like expanded my knowledge of films through the years, Sid Caesar has always become someone who always brings his A game and always brings something unique to it. I love his comic charm. I love his comic approach. I love the facial expressions that he comes up with of shock, surprise, or dejection. He's brilliant. And this is one thing that's good about this kind of comedy caper, and Mad World does it so well, is that all the main players are so very different that you will find someone who you latch onto and want to be the victor at the end. So there's that reason for you to stick with it. And you don't, you're swept up in all the antics going on because you're rooting for this one person. Even if you've picked the wrong person, you don't care. You're still rooting for them. I love the energy that this film has. The stunts are crazy. There's some wild, over-the-top stunts in here. I did read somewhere that apparently at the time of making it, there was only about 100 stunt performers in the whole of the US industry for film, and 80 of them worked on this film alone.
I'm not surprised, because even up to the very, very last minute with the when they're in the building and they're on the ladders from the fire truck, it's funny because that's the scene that I remembered the most watching it. That was the one that was ingrained into my memory. And then I went, oh, the flying sequence. Oh, and then there's then you do that. You go, oh, and then there's such and such a scene and such a scene. You've got the fantastic and ridiculously unnerving dance that Dick Shawn does and his girlfriend, who's this sort of surfer boy, which is slightly unnerving. Great Dick Shawn. There are so many people in this for you to say in every sequence, oh, it's the great such and such. One of the legacies of this film is it was promoted to be the first film made in one projector, Cinerama, which originally Cinerama, the process required 3 separate cameras, 3 process reels were projected, synchronized on a huge curved screen, and it was originally planned for 3 camera Cinerama, but it was the first one projector Cinerama, and it was one of those gimmicks like Super Panavision that came out during the 60s, or Ultra Panavision 70mm, like films like Battle of the Bulge or Khartoum or The Greatest Story Ever Told, or even 2001 A Space Odyssey were all 70mm. So the print, no matter where you see it, it looks amazing, and I would love to have seen it in Cinerama.
Yeah. Back to like the names of cast that come up. Apparently, Jack Benny's cameo was originally supposed to be Stan Laurel. They made the offer out to Stan Laurel, but in 1957, after Oliver Hardy passed away, Laurel vowed never to perform again. He'd lost his longtime partner on stage and screen, and he stuck to his promise, and that's the reason why he didn't pop up. And I did find a nice bit of trivia that I now want to rewatch the film, even though I've said like I've only recently rewatched it. Milton Berle always made sure that whenever there was a group scene, he was the last one in shot. He would wait for the rest to walk off set before he walks off set. And he would sometimes find ways to improvise, doing some task like writing something down or, jostling with something in order to stay on set when he's not supposed to be there, just so he could always be the last person in frame. And now I want to rewatch it just to see
me too.
Every moment when he does this. There was a lot of improvisation on the set of this. There was a script that was kind of worked with. Apparently there was 2 scripts, one which was for all the action and one which was for all the comedy. But they were all encouraged and suggested to, play with the ideas, have fun, joke with each other, banter. We'll film it, and if it works, it'll stay in the film. And you get that feeling from it because here is a great bunch of comical names all riffing on a great idea. And that's why it holds together for its whole 202 minutes. Because I think if it had just stuck to a script, it might have grown tired. But allowing these performers to just perform and do what they do best, it keeps the energy all the way to the end. It's hard. I can understand people who've not seen this because they've seen the runtime and gone, but genuinely, this is one that the runtime flies by, and even at the end of it, you've still got a big beaming smile and still think to yourself, I'd like to see more.
I'll agree.
It was originally
And
going to be titled something a little less serious because director Stanley Kramer is generally known for rather hard-hitting social message kind of films. And this was him basically saying, I can do comedy as well. And you know what? Stanley Kramer can certainly deliver comedy and action in one film.
If you watch this, you find, as Andy said, the characters who you're going to root for. But keep in mind that nobody is really sympathetic in this film.
No.
And everyone kind of gets their just desserts. Even the characters that you think are going to be the ones that you'll root for, or who should get the money, ultimately, they're all pretty despicable. And that's what makes it fresh. That's what makes it different. Yes, the huge stunts. Yes, the fact that it's a vignettes of movies. You know, you stick with one character, you jump to another one, and because of that element, it never feels as though it drags. Interestingly enough, on the re-released Blu-ray version, there is an intermission, exactly like there would be in the film. And it just helps you get up, make a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and go back to it and talk about it. Fantastic idea. We should have an intermission in the show, Andy.
On its intermission screening, on its world premiere, this film, the cinema that was screening it, while the intermission was on, they had mock radio news broadcasts talking about
Brilliant.
what all of the characters were up to, either on the lead up to the intermission or during the intermission, so that when people came back, they could jump straight back in. And it wasn't just playing within the theatre itself, it was playing outside the theatre in the concession stand and even out towards the streets, so that people were like, what's going on in there? And I think that's a great bit of publicity and marketing. And it'd be interesting if those recordings were ever to be recovered and to be included on that intermission on the Blu-ray release. It's a great film. It's one that like I say, I always forget that I've watched it, but then when I watched it, I spent 2 days telling people, oh, have you seen this? You should watch it. This is now it being put down as legacy, that I can now go back to this show and remind myself that I've seen this film so many times. Well worth checking out.
Yeah, it's one of those films that it launched that kind of ensemble cast movie, and especially the comedic search for money. There was going to be a sequel, but then there was a film called Scavenger Hunt in 1979, The $1 Million Mystery in 1987. Remember that one, where I think you got the clues and you could find the $1 million out of it. And then Rat Race in 2001, which is not particularly very good or very funny, and does bear more than one gag reminiscent of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Check it out. Give yourself an entire evening. Order a meal while it's on, because you can do that. It's that kind of film.